Action execution is your direction of energy. Are you energy forward or are you energy back? Are you energy forward or are you energy back? I will give you a wonderful Arsenal thing here by saying to you, and this isn't me speaking, this is Rodri from Manchester City speaking.
Podcast. Hello and welcome to an FDP special.
So it's a really interesting one this week. Not our usual type of special, I think it's probably fair to say. Something very different to what we've done on the FDP so far.
I think, yeah, you're right. I think what we are trying to do on the FDP is diversify and look at all of the different roles within football. So we have had, the guests that we've had have been from people who make things towards kits like glove glue, as an example, to people who run a football club like Hamilton Academical. So, and then everything kind of in the middle of that, we've had people on in regards to football, and now we're entering in to something that's just that little bit specialist, and a little bit more different in terms of sports psychology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know how we've managed it really. He's been on so many different podcasts. He's worked with the elite of the elite.
Yeah, we're not talking about like
to name one.
Sorry, who?
Arne Slot, just to name one recently.
It's not. Yeah, I mean, it's not like we've gone and found just anyone. We've probably gone to like the top of the game.
Yeah, I think we do. And Gareth Bale has summed up his book. One of his books, I should say, as quote life-changing. So there we go. Do you want to introduce
the creme de la creme of the sports psychology, and much, much more than that, as we will find out. But yeah, let's get into it. Here is our interview with Dan Abrahams. Thanks for joining us, Dan. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm delighted and honoured to be here. So super excited.
Yeah, the honour is all ours. Honestly, no, thanks for joining. We really do appreciate it. We've been preparing for this one kind of the most that we have from a lot of our guests, because of who you are and just the topic that we're going to sort of have a discussion about is fascinating and something that we're both really interested in. So, just to kick us off, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the world of sports and psychology and things like that, that'd be really helpful.
Sure, yeah, delighted to. So I've got 30 years in high-performance sport. I feel like I'm getting really old now when I say that. I started off a professional golfer. As I always semi-joke in these kind of introductions, I was a terrible professional golfer. I say semi-joke because there is an element of truth to it. I didn't win any money, largely because of what was happening between my two ears. Although all my mates would say a distinct lack of talent didn't help as well. But I played pro golf, didn't win any money. I started to coach the game. So I have a playing professional sporting background, and then I have a coaching background as well as a PGA golf coach. But I always had a real interest in the psychological aspects, not just of golf, but of sport. I saw some sports psychologists myself for my playing. And so I decided, as I was coaching golf, to head to university, did a degree in psychology, a master's degree in sports psychology, and then about 20 years ago now I became a full-time sports psychologist, registered and qualified sports psychologist. And over those 20 years, I've worked across all sports, principally worked in football, but I'll go there in a second. I obviously know golf like the back of my hand, so I've done a lot of work in golf. I was lead psych for England Golf 2013-2016. I've worked on both sides of the Atlantic with some of the best players. Away from golf, I've worked I was lead psychologist for England Rugby going into 2019 World Cup, working with Eddie Jones. lived to tell the tale, so that's pretty good. I've just come out of 2 years working with Aston Martin Formula One. I work quite heavily in motorsports now. I've worked in tennis, MMA, boxing, worked with some pretty remarkable fighters. So worked across all sports. I don't think there's a sport really I haven't done work in, but football happens to be the one I've worked in the most. I grew up a Spurs supporter. That was painful back in the 1990s, I can assure you. Yeah, end of 80s, 90s, when I was a teenager. But around about 2006, I started to get involved in non-league football, learning the language of the game and the specific challenges of the game. I had a wonderful foundational couple of years with a brilliant coach called Wayne Burnett, who's been the under-23s coach at Spurs for the past, I don't know, half a dozen or so years. And he really gave me a firm foundation in the game. And then I got my first big position, I suppose, at West Ham. I wasn't directly employed by the club, but I was working with quite a few West Ham players. I got introduced to somebody called Carlton Cole, if you remember him, who was languishing in the West Ham reserves at the time, and my job was to try to help him feel a bit more like a Premier League footballer and try to help him get the most from his career. 18 months later, a lot of work on his mindset later, he made his debut for England under Fabio Capello. So even though I was only a very small part of that process, he very kindly allowed me to write a bit about our work together in my first book, which I'll touch on in a second. But that I went on to QPR. It sort of became a bit of a snowball effect. I've worked at half a dozen Premier League clubs. The last one I worked at was AFC Bournemouth under Eddie Howe. And the last 2 years, I worked at Feyenoord in the Dutch Eredivisie, working along none other than Arne Slot, helping them to win the Dutch Eredivisie Championship and the Dutch Cup last season. Also worked with range of coaches at the academy level there as well. I've got 4 books, one of them golf, 3 of them football, one of which very kindly Gareth Bale said changed his life a few years ago. I don't think it changed his life, but it was very nice of him to say so, and I sold a few books off the back of that. So I think that brings us up to speed, really. So yeah, I'm a sports psychologist, just passionate about the psychological aspects of sports and just really demystifying this area for players, coaches, parents of sport, and actually the general watcher of sport, which I'm sure we'll do today. So that's me.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Everything you've just read off, I'm just sitting there going, wow, that's incredible. I don't even know where to start with that. I guess let's start with the golf side, shall we, to begin with? I think it's probably quite topical at the moment.
Indeed.
Obviously, with Rory getting across the line finally, completing the Grand Slam. Do you see it differently because of the sort of the mental challenges he's obviously been facing, especially after, was it last year or the year before, he came so close? And obviously, with your background in golf as well, do you see that challenge differently?
I suppose I look at it from a deeper perspective. I'm watching it from the perspective of where he might be, where I think he might be mentally. A word, and we'll do a deep dive straight away here, Ben. So thank you for the prompt. There's a term we use in psychology called activation. So think of when players get physically activated, you also get mentally activated, and it's essentially your mental energy. Think about yourself. The times when you are doing work and you're kind of really into what you're doing and you're alert and you're ready and there's an intensity to what you're doing, hopefully a little bit like the three of us now. Anyway, in sport, let's start with golf, but this is very, very relevant for football. But in golf, you've got to be mentally activated to the right level because motion can get in the way. And it's very interesting when we're recording this, and you said it's very relevant right now. I mean, it was yesterday that the Masters took place, the final round, and Rory was victorious. And he was up against Bryson DeChambeau, and they really had two contrasting mental states that they were working towards in order to optimize their performance. Bryson was trying to very much what we call upregulate himself. So he was trying to increase, his feelings of activation. He was trying to create more mental intensity, by getting himself up through the crowd and geeing himself up, because that tends to be where he plays best. He can get too activated, and I think that actually happened a few times in the tournament, but he tries to get himself really up. Whereas Rory has a tendency to get overly frustrated with himself or anxious, or too down on himself, but he does try to bring himself into a calmer, more relaxed state. So he tries to down-regulate with his activation. See, we're really doing a deep dive straight away here. So I was really looking at it from the perspective of that activation levels. Is Rory keeping his cool, calm self? And by his own admission yesterday afterwards, he won, but he said, I was just so nervous. He was so anxious. And so his activation levels were going through the roof and he had to manage himself. And he said the double bogey on the first, the 6 that he made on the first, actually calmed him a little bit, which was an interesting thing. So I'm really looking at that, because if Rory doesn't get that right, if he doesn't calm himself, then it's very, very, he loses his touch on the greens. He loses his feel with his short shots, even with his swing. So it's a really delicate balance there to be had. So much of it, I'm looking through the prism of mindset. But both of those players, Rory especially, they're such specimens of golfers. You know, they're so strong. The game's changed in that way. It's a power game. You know, they're so strong. They're hitting just incredible yardages and distances. They're so powerful. And that in and of itself helps them to be mentally tougher anyway. That's kind of how I'm looking at so much of golf. How are they doing things mentally? Are they keeping the same persona and the same mental state no matter what's happening to them? Are they executing great ruthless, what I call ruthless routines on every single shot, making sure they are dialed in, focused of attention, the right activation levels at every single shot? All those things are happening every single second out there, you know. And the last thing to say about this is that what people don't appreciate is that the brain, if you think about the golf swing working in seconds, just as football works in seconds, you know, it takes a second to score a goal. It takes a second to complete a pass, to give the ball away. The golf swing works in a second, but the brain works in milliseconds. So the brain trumps golf and trumps football for speed every single time. In fact, the brain trumps everything. The fastest thing in sports is actually the tip of a fence. Saber, right? That is the fastest thing in sport, I believe. And even, you know, the brain trumps that for speed every single time. So the brain is working in milliseconds, throwing up thoughts, emotions, feelings all the time into a player's conscious awareness. And that can happen halfway back in a swing. You know, that can happen midway through a shot that you're trying to get away to, you know, test the goalkeeper. You know, the brain is working really, really quick, working in milliseconds, so it's constantly getting in the way. There you go. You've got a degree in psychology already, right there.
Yeah. And along with that, what's fascinating is along with that, you've got all of that going on, and then you've got different personality types, which must come into it as well, because you're talking about different people reacting to different things under different sorts of pressure and how they can handle that because of their brain, their personality, etc. And is that something that you can look at and see? So you're talking about McIlroy was calmer, and the other person, I've forgotten his name now.
Bryson DeChambeau, yeah.
DeChambeau, that's it. He seems a little bit more activated. Is that what you're sort of looking at?
Yeah, I mean, whether that comes under the rubric of personality and personality science, I mean, certainly when you work in these clubs and, you know, in football or rugby, and you work behind the scenes in the golf, a player's personality traits come through definitely. And it's not to suggest the traits aren't happening out there, but it's very much the mental skills that are coming through. What are they paying attention to? The activation piece, in what style are they executing their actions? Are they on the front foot? Are they on the back foot? Are they really ripping through the golf ball with confidence, or are they a bit hesitant and inhibited? That it absolutely has relationship with personality traits, but kind of personality traits tend to be broader and deeper. I mean, there's what we know in personality science, and there's 100 years of good science that underpins this, is that human beings have 5 main traits: conscientiousness, openness, extroversion, neuroticism, and have I said openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So we tend to, as human beings, trade in these 5 things. So when I talk about Rory becoming very anxious or becoming very angry with himself, that's neuroticism. That's emotional instability. So there's definitely an element of that. I'm looking for that trait of emotional stability, and Rory being unstable. with Bryson DeChambeau, him being up for it and activated. What could that be? That's kind of the disagreeable side of him. That's the competitive side. That's the screw you, I want to smash you type side. So that's the personality trait of agreeableness, and that's being low agreeable. And actually, if you watch really, really interesting program to watch, where you really see player personality shine through and how that's dealt with, is The Last Dance in the basketball on Netflix, and how Phil Jackson dealt with, Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman, and really interesting. Michael Jordan really fed off, and Kobe Bryant was the same, going over to another sport here, basketball, but very much low agreeable to the point of aggressiveness. It's like if you watch a David Attenborough documentary and you watch chimpanzees rip apart monkeys, right? That's the evolutionary animalistic side of Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. They are literally wanting to annihilate you. And that's the low agreeable side of personality. So yeah, it does have some bearing on personality traits.
And that can all be put to, I guess, all sports.
Yes.
Because, as you say, because the brain is faster than... So no matter what sport you're working in, you are looking at that in the same way, I guess.
Very much. Slightly different way to look at this is, and I've alluded to this already, is there's 3 mental skills going on every single second. Let's come back to football. Your favourite football club, whoever, and I can't quite see, Ben, the shirts behind you, who they're...
You're not going to like it. It's Arsenal.
Okay, no,
you said you're a Spurs fan.
That's fine. That's fine. Last couple of years I've been trying to work with Arsenal, a few conversations behind the scenes.
Oh, amazing.
Wow.
Trying to is the emphasis there, Ben. Trying to, not succeeding right now. But I've worked with players at Arsenal in the past. And when you watch Arsenal, Will, who do you support?
Same. I'm a
oh, you're both Gooners.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. All right. So when you watch Arsenal playing, there's 3 mental skills that are happening every single second out there that influence anticipation, decision making, physical functioning, and technical execution, and tactical execution as well. Okay. So overtly, what you're watching on the pitch, the behaviours that you're watching, are the anticipation piece, the decision making piece, the decision the player makes, the technical execution, the tactical execution. Right. So you're watching that from the outside. Internally, what's constantly mediating that are 3 things: attention, activation, we've spoken about that, and action execution. Let me take this bit by bit. Attention, as the name suggests, is the direction and the duration of a player's focus of attention. Where are they directing their focus of attention, and the duration? Okay, and what we want is a high performance mindset where a player is focused and connected to the game. So what we know is the best players in the world in their position tend to be focused and connected to the game. By connected to the game, I mean connected to space, ball, opposition and teammates. Space, ball, opposition and teammates. And they're constantly rifling through that every single second. Space, ball, opposition teammates. Space, ball, opposition teammates. They're constantly looking up and around. So if you look at the research, what the research suggests is the greatest scanner of all time is Javi Hernandez. He used to scan 0.8 times per second. So he's constantly head up, looking up around. Lampard was something like 0.7. So he was very high as well. So when you've got your players in the middle of your park there playing for Arsenal, they've got their head up, looking around, they're constantly scanning, paying attention to their environment, and they're paying attention to ball, space, where's the ball, where's the space, where's the opposition, where are players, and they're making sense of all of that in the moment that then educates their next action, their next task. They're action hungry. Okay. So that's what focus of attention is. They've got to stay constantly connected to the game. They don't want to be distracted and disconnected from the game. But there's so many things going on around them that can distract them and disconnect them from the game. Their internal thoughts, emotions, feelings can distract them and disconnect them from the game. Anything that's external, the referee, it might be something a teammate does, it might be something the opposition is doing, maybe really, really well, can distract them. So they've got to stay constantly focused and connected to the game in an optimal way. The activation pieces, as I said, they want to stay mentally alert and ready at all times. They don't want to climb too high. They don't want to drop down too low. And from a football perspective, what we know, there's 6 emotions really that are constantly influencing their readiness and their alertness. 3 makes them climb too high, and that's anxiety, frustration, and anger. anxiety, frustration, and anger. 3 that drop them too low. That's despondency, complacency, and lethargy. Believe it or not, these players, they succumb to lethargy, they succumb to complacency, they can succumb to despondency, they can succumb to anxiety, frustration, and anger, and that takes them away from a state of readiness and alertness and can distract and disconnect them, because attention and activation work hand in hand. And then you've got a third A, so attention, activation, and then you've got action, execution. Now, this is a really compelling one here. Action execution is your direction of energy. Are you energy forward or are you energy back? Are you energy forward or are you energy back? I will give you a wonderful Arsenal thing here by saying to you, and this isn't me speaking, this is Rodri from Manchester City speaking. I've got a great video that I show players, I show teams. Rodri at the end of last season talking about the difference between them and every other team. And you could almost reverse this season because it's not going so well for them, right? And actually, I can't remember who the player has said. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So Rodri said, the difference between us and everyone else, and especially Arsenal, is up here. He said it was in the mind. He said that when Arsenal came to play us, he said we could tell they weren't there to try to win. They just wanted to get some kind of result, maybe a draw, right? You guys would know better than me what the result was. I can't even remember I don't think you beat them, right? But so he said we could tell that. So what that is action, execution, energy forward, energy back. Arsenal were energy back. Manchester City were energy forward. They were executing their actions positively, purposefully, proactively, energy forward. Here's another graphic example of energy forward versus energy back. England in the 2020 Euros final that was played in 2021, wasn't it? Against Italy in the final, right? First 20 minutes, England are energy forward. They're executing actions positively, purposefully, proactively. Luke Shaw scores after 3 minutes. Everything's going smoothly. If you read the UEFA technical report that was written by David Moyes, of all people, and Aitor Karanka, the former Middlesbrough manager, you read this report, it's fascinating. They're just talking about how the data demonstrated England just became so fearful, not brave, fearful. They played energy back. And energy back is hesitancy, inhibition, and passiveness. When teams become hesitant or inhibited or passive, they're dead. So everything is about getting them into 3 areas of attention, activation, and action execution. And this is what I did with Arne Slot. We called it HPM, high performance mindset. The attention was focused and connected to the game. Our players stay focused and connected to the game no matter what. Our players stay optimal activation, ready and alert, ready and alert, ready and alert. And then the third piece is energy forward, executing actions positively, proactively, and purposefully. And nothing and no one takes us away from our HPM, high performance mindset. We never drop down to our LPM, low performance mindset. Although we did once against Jose Mourinho's Roma, which I can talk about. But that is those 3 mental skills, attention, activation, and action execution, is a constant happening every millisecond. And this, to me, my hypothesis, and this is what I'm trying to say to teams like Arsenal, is this is why you're not beating Liverpool. I think you can add on points if you get better at these, in my humble opinion.
Because that in itself, you've got to, I guess, understand where that backwards kind of mentality is within the team, that player, and why they're thinking that. And obviously, because it's a team, it's probably going to be more than one player.
Yeah, it can be. And the killer is, if you think about, again, let's come back to football as a game of anticipation and decision-making. Anticipation and decision-making is constantly mediating your technical execution and your tactical execution, as in, essentially your action capability, your action selection, and your action execution. It's constantly mediating that. And so, if you've got 1 or 2 players who are in low performance mindset, okay, it is going to have a huge knock-on effect across the whole team, because their positioning is going to be out, their action execution, their anticipation, their decision making. It has an enormous impact. And by enormous impact, it's just that they find themselves out of position at the wrong time. It's just that they're a fraction slower to cover space, to find space. It's just that they don't quite track the run of that opposing winger, who gets just a little bit ahead of them, gets the ball into the area, into the right part. Striker gets fractionally ahead of the central defender. Bang, goal, done, 1-0. And then suddenly there's a slight despondency across the team, and that's a killer. And that is why I would always say, and it's why I said to Arne Slot, you need this shared mental model of HPM and LPM, high performance mindset, low performance mindset, and we need to obsess high performance mindset. And this doesn't happen enough in the Premier League. There's not enough of that kind of language where we are going to go out there and obsess high performance mindset.
Because that's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? Because so how are you working then on that day-to-day basis? Are you then watching like the training, you're watching the matches, and then you're being involved after that, working with kind of nutritionists, physios, things like that? Or how does it work then on a day-to-day for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'll share with you what I can share whilst being respectful of certain proprietary information.
Yeah, of course, yeah, please, yeah.
What I can share is that, look, for me, my number one job is to bring the language, an agreeable language, into the building. So let's call it high performance mindset and low performance mindset. Okay. And predominantly now sports psychologists will work with and through coaches. So to speak to your point, I'm predominantly working with, let's say Arne Slot and his coaches, for example, Sipke Hulshoff, who's gone with him to Liverpool. What was very powerful at Feyenoord was the medical and sports science department were really into it. So the heads of performance is Ruben Pieters, who's gone to Liverpool with Arne, and Lee Eggers, who's an Aussie who's awesome. He's gone back to Australia now, but the heads of performances, Ruben and Lee, were very much driving it across the organisation when I wasn't there. So doing it in the gym. The gym work was a lot to do with being in a high performance mindset. So the players are hearing these terms all the time. So they're making sense of high performance mindset in these mini environments across the training ground. Everybody's got an all-in feel reinforcing this language. I don't need to be there to do that. And there's people in more powerful positions than me to be able to reinforce it. So that's absolutely critical. And if Arne and his coaches are using the language, then that's a very powerful thing to do. Ideally, I'm able to work with individual players. What happened with Feyenoord is I was able to work with individual players, and then towards the back end of my work there, I was also able to work with small groups as well. So Arne entrusted me to work with small groups of players. So that was quite dynamic. So that's what you're trying to do. And with small groups, you're trying to help them talk to each other about high performance mindset, because behind the scenes in these clubs, not a lot of conversation goes on, or not enough conversation goes on. The models in football, as opposed to a model of rugby, in rugby, there's a lot of bottom up facilitation. By that I mean, and that sounds quite corporate speak, but that's very much players are more involved. Whereas in football, it's very top down. Coaches stand at the front, talk, players listen, players go and do. And invariably, they don't always do well, in part because they're not as involved. They're recipients and not participants. So you're trying to make them participants. You're trying to get them involved. So my work there is very facilitative. Right, what does HPM mean to us? Talk to us. When were we in HPM in the last game? When we played Ajax, when we played PSV, tell us about moments of HPM. How are we going to help each other be in HPM? How are you as players going to be in HPM? Because again, I work from the foundational philosophy of players are your most powerful psychologists. If you can help players be psychologists, that's a very powerful place to be. So that's what you're trying to do. So in an ideal scenario, you're trying to work with and through coaches, with and through the broader auxiliary staff. You're trying to eke out opportunities to work one-to-one with players, which I had a lot of opportunity at Feyenoord. And then you're also trying to work with small groups as well, and maybe even larger groups. That's the ideal scenario. Quite often what happens in these clubs is the sports psychologist sits in the medical department and is back behind the scenes and is sought out when a player wants to speak to them. And I just think that's an outrageously outdated, ineffective model. I personally think it's outrageously ridiculous that no Premier League team at the moment has a sports psychologist on their coaching staff. I think it's the dumbest thing. There you go. You heard it here first.
And I agree. And because it's surprising, isn't it? Because psychology is, you've spoken about it being one thing that can get in the way of that high performance. And you said about the game against Roma. What was that you had to get with the low performance when you went into that?
Yeah, sure. again, I'll share what I feel is appropriate. And again, I'm sharing a lot here, largely because these were my terms. This is my IP, my intellectual property. And it's very difficult to have IP in psychology because you don't get to have the intellectual property of confidence and concentration. You'd be quite wealthy if you did, but you don't get that IP. But there's certain terms that I would deem to be my intellectual property in this space. And so I feel comfortable sharing. It's just that when you have, I'll speak generically here, when you have conversations with players afterwards, after games, that invariably you try to find out, as I've alluded to already, when players are really good, when the team has stayed in HPM or when the team's dropped down to a low performance mindset or LPM. And in essence, the feedback was in that season, when we played Ajax, we beat them 3-2, which is the first time we've beaten them away from home for 17 years. The team did really well to stay in HPM. I'm not saying that's the only reason why we won. I'm not saying that. We won because we had great players. We won because Arne Slot and this coaching staff are great coaches. I'm in row Z. I'm not claiming anything else. But HPM played a small part in that. Now, when you compare and contrast to, we went into the Roma game, we won the first leg 1-0. So we've taken it to Rome 1-0 up. Tough game because fans are banned from the Roma Stadium. The Feyenoord fans are banned. So it was 80,000 fans in there, no Feyenoord fans. Roma went 1-0 up, but to all intents and purposes, my understanding from feedback is that we were in our high performance mindset, which is understandable. There's not much to lose. Why not? Why not play energy forward? Now, 29th minute, Igor Pachau, the Brazilian player, scores a header. Great goal, right? Stadium is dead silent. You look it up on YouTube, it is dead silent, right? As soon as that ball hits the back of the net, my hypothesis is that is when our players, some of them, not all of them, probably, and by some of their own admissions, drop down to their LPM, their low performance mindset. Why? Well, because suddenly there's something to lose. We're now 2-1 up on aggregate. There's only 10 minutes to go, probably 5 minutes of injury time, so roughly 15 minutes. There's something to lose. So what happens? Immediately the players drop down to LPM. There's a distraction. So players start to become disconnected from the game. Now we're raising too high in activation because there's anxiety, anxious thoughts, emotions, feelings hitting their nervous system, hitting their brain. And that makes a difference to their anticipation, decision making, their technical and tactical execution. So suddenly everything is a little bit slower, a little bit weaker. Roma have 70% of possession, a little bit like Italy had 70% of possession against England in the Euros, right? And so what happens? Lo and behold, 89th minute, Dybala steps up, bang, goal, right? 2-1 on the night, 2-2 on aggregate, and then it's so hard for the team to come back to HPM when they've been in LPM. It's so exhausting to self-regulate in that moment, to manage your activation, to click back into energy forward. That's hard. Not impossible with better leadership and better teamwork and better mental skills, but very difficult. And they didn't, and they lost 4-1. Is it the only reason? No, I'm not suggesting that. Roma players were very good. Jose Mourinho is a brilliant manager, but that is a dynamic that's invisible that's going on every given second.
And it's your, you've said it's your hypotheses based on your understanding, your experience, and your, the science that comes behind that. So with that in mind, why do you think then that in the Premier League there isn't more sports psychologists on that coaching team? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, did Gareth Southgate have a sports psychologist when he was England manager?
Yeah. So Gareth had, firstly, Dr. Pippa Grange, who's wonderful, brilliant, and then Dr. Ian Mitchell, and Mitch now is up at Newcastle. So brilliant, two brilliant sports psychs, and very, very, very heavily involved in the cultural side of things.
Yeah.
So did a lot of great work there from a cultural perspective. And as sports psychologists, we would all go about things in a different way. I might be less inclined to do cultural work, and I think they did the right cultural work for England because I think I'm personally a huge fan of Gareth Southgate and his time. I think he did wonderful work. I think I would always go in and try to do a little bit more mental skills work around the shared mental model of HPM, LPM, that kind of stuff. I'm not suggesting they didn't do that. I don't know what they did, but I know they did a lot of cultural stuff. So he did have that. You asked a question before that, and it's gone completely out of my head.
Sorry, yeah. So I was just kind of thinking with, what's happened
why don't they have
with
that?
Feyenoord and with the England team. Why has the Premier League not sort of done that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a socio-cultural narrative of where a sports psych fits into an organisation. I think it's a misunderstanding of the broad and deep nature of sports psychology. Let me start elsewhere. I think first and foremost, we in sports psychology don't necessarily do ourselves enough favours. We haven't, we're sports psychologists, we're psychologists, we're not very good marketers. And the reality is that life is about marketing yourself, no matter what your profession is. And we haven't marketed ourselves well in terms of what we can actually offer. People now, and I think we're taking things in a direction that's an important direction, but I think shouldn't be the only direction. That's on the well-being and the mental health side, which is very, very important, no doubts. But we're starting to lose our grip on our contribution on the performance psychology piece. You've also got to remember that skill acquisition, which is a big thing now, how people develop skills using their body, that came from the 1960 labs in sports psychology. So we can be heavily involved in skill acquisition. We can be heavily involved in coaching science. We have a lot of broad and deep things to offer, and it's not often realized. And so what's happened is that at that level of the game, they just see us as the mental health and the well-being people. But a clinical psychologist can come along and do that. That shouldn't be our speciality. We should be all about, in my humble opinion, what the kind of things we did at Feyenoord, which is the performance psychology piece. So we can work systemically, we can work on team building, we can work across the organization. So we're in a very powerful position. I also think we don't necessarily do ourselves any favors by, it's important to have the rigorous science underpinning, but when we use terms like individual zone of optimal functioning, then it loses people. I just use the term game face, right? So we also have to find a way to be scientifically underpinned and scientifically rigorous and not lose that evidence-based or evidence-informed practice, yet at the same time help coaches and players really understand what psychology is. I think, in the world of football, there's a lot of coaches who might say, well, it's not psychological because the game's too quick, which is, as we've already mentioned, the brain works in milliseconds. It's a complete misunderstanding of how the brain is structured and how it functions. So there's a lack of education, there's a lack of understanding what sports psychs can bring. And then we as psychs have to do better. We have to be willing to put on our boots and be on the pitch. We have to be willing to put on our, trainers and be on the court, our golf shoes and be on the course. You've got to get out there, out of an office, into the environment. And we've got to be good enough to be able to build trust. And it takes a bit of time to build trust. It takes time for coaches to go, yeah, I trust you in order to put you in front of our players, but that takes two to tango. That's got to be both ways. But I don't think we're going in the right direction. I really don't, because we've gone so heavy on the well-being and the mental health. Where I think it's, and obviously I'm caricaturing things when I think it's dumb. I don't think anybody's dumb out there, right? But I think that I just don't understand. I mean, the last Ancelotti had Bruno Di Michele with him at Chelsea, and he took Bruno Di Michele from AC Milan with the Milan Lands. Now, Bruno Di Michele would be more a sports scientist, but claimed to do sports psychology. So that was somebody who had an assistant manager's position at Chelsea. Was it 2009, 2010?
Yeah,
I think so.
The other person would be a guy called Bill Beswick, lovely guy, in his mid to late 70s now. Don't think he does much work, but Steve McLaren used him at Derby in the mid-90s, brought him to Manchester United, and then took him from United in the late 90s over to Middlesbrough with him, and he was Steve's assistant at Middlesbrough. So there is another example. Forgotten, who's the PSG manager, the Spanish dude?
Luis
Enrique.
Enrique.
Thank you, Luis Enrique. I don't know whether his psych is on the coaching staff, but I know he heavily uses somebody, and this guy might be on the coaching staff. Other than that, I don't really. Nagelsmann might have somebody, but I don't think does. Otherwise, the landscape is very much the psych in the background. Now, look, you might get a whole bunch of other sports sites. You say, that Dan Abrahams, he talks BS. That's far too over the top. It's far too exuberant. It's the wrong take. Absolutely fine. But because your skill set in part is about sense making and sense giving, and because, at least through my lens, we should have a really strong knowledge of coaching science, session design, coach behaviors, as well as skill acquisition, there is no reason why we don't have the skills to be, say, a fourth assistant or something like that. I would argue that, and I don't know why that doesn't happen more, because I think a manager would want somebody like that in the room in coaching meetings to check and challenge around the psychological side of things.
So just on that, with the sort of assistant side, do you think it would be a sort of job title change of being a third, fourth assistant that would change the kind of perspective of your actual role? Now, the only reason I'm saying that is because of Arsenal, for example. I don't know if you've seen the documentary on Amazon, I think it is. Is it Carlos Queta? So he sort of does a lot of the sort of mental health side of things, checking in with people, as well as being a general coach as well. Do you think, so he sort of highlights it a little bit more, that different kind of setup? Do you think it would need a club like that to take that position of, okay, Dan, you're at Arsenal, you're our fourth assistant, and then all of a sudden that changes the whole perspective and potentially the landscape?
Yeah, I think it does, because it demonstrates a seriousness of mindset. I think by not having that, there's not a seriousness to the mental side. It's there. I mean, Brighton have just advertised for a full-time sports psych, and part of that advertisement is you will need to be available for game days. So fair play to them. It's still not on the coaching staff, but it's one step away. So it's pretty good. And I'm saying this, guys, as I don't want a full-time position. I love being a consultant across all sports. So I wouldn't even want the role that I'm blooming well advertising right now or insisting on. I don't want that role, because I mean, don't get me wrong. If it was a seriously good offer, I might have to step into that. But yes, I mean, I'll stop short of saying, show me the money. Jerry Maguire. No, I seriously don't really want a full-time job, but I'm advocating for it because it's a great question you've asked there, Ben. I think for me it's more, and I actually know Carlos a little bit. You know, he's a wonderful young coach. He's a wonderful young person, a wonderful young coach, and he's a credit to the fact that he's on Mikel's coaching staff. I know he's passionate about the mental side, but he would be the first one, I'm no doubt, to say, I'm not a sports psychologist. And I think somebody like that, alongside other great young coaches at these clubs, would absolutely thrive and benefit from having even somebody who is on the coaching staff, but is only there 2-3 days a week, right? But is really attached to that coaching staff. Because, as I said earlier, so much of what you're doing is you're working with and through coaches. I would want to help Carlos be better at delivering psychology in his role as a coach. You know, this comes back to, you know, your days of, you know, your Brian Cloughs and your Sir Alex going, well, I'm the psychologist. You know, I worked at QPR when, God, I'm getting old guy, Neil, who was the manager of QPR when I was there. Very famous manager, forgetting his name. Thank you so much. Yeah. Neil Warner. How do I forget Neil Warner? That's going to be one of the least possible people to forget. And Neil would say, I'm, and he said it while I was there. He said, I'm the psychologist. I don't mind that, because my response to that is, look, Gaffer, you are. You're not a psychologist per se, but you do psychology in your role every single second, you know. And there's so much that they can do that's going to be so much more powerful than me if it comes from them, because, you know, they are on the grass. They're delivering on tactics, you know. So if you can envelope the tactical side in the mental side, you bring the two. We want to see that in HPM, high performance mindset. You know, we want to see that in HPM. That's a very powerful place to be. So really, these positions, these roles go hand in hand. I want to be there by Carlos Cuesta at Arsenal every day or 3 days a week, and I want to be checking and challenging him. I want him checking and challenging me. I want us guiding the language here. I want us sitting down with 1 or 2 players, or a small group of 3 or 4 players, and working together, coach, psych, 2, 3 players to work on teamwork and around the tactical side of the game, the tactical framework that we've got, making sure we're mentally going to get that right. That to me is very, very powerful. Not just, the coach gets on with it, him or herself, because they should know how to do it mentally. Most of them haven't got a clue. Just as I don't have a clue about, listen to the tactical side, I have no idea what's going on. But it's not my job, right? But it's certainly my job to be able to help a coach, to help players engage tactically, to learn tactically, to compete tactically. Learning, engagement, competing, those are my watchwords. Those are my buzzwords. That's what psychology is.
How do you find then explaining that and getting that message across to people? So, like, I think Carlton Cole spoke about you on the podcast with Jimmy Bullard recently and about the work that he did with you. With someone like Carlton Cole, how do you get into their brain so that they can understand what you need them to understand?
Yeah, you've obviously got to make it as simple as possible, as practical as possible, and supported as much as possible. Really, as simple as possible, as practical as possible, and supported as much as possible. Let's start with the practical side. It's got to make sense to them behaviorally or action-wise. And that's a very powerful way to do psychology. And again, people think of psychology too much from the perspective of it's from your neck upwards. That's not psychology at all. Psychology is from your head down to your feet, out into your environment. It's from your environment into your feet, up into your head. So if you take Carlton Cole, for example, and I can talk about this because he allowed me to talk about this in my book, Soccer Tough, available on Amazon, by the way, everybody. When I started working with him, Claudio Ranieri described him as his lion. He was tucking away 40, 50 goals a season in the academy. He was a great young player. Lovely lad, lovely kid, great young player. Got lost in the first team, that classic got lost in the first team system. And by his own admission, and again, please, I want to emphasise, he allows me to refer to this because he thinks this is an important message for all young players to hear. He got to a place where he was 6'2", but he felt 5'2" going out on the pitch. And this happens, guys. You're watching them week in, week out. Honestly, these are human beings with thoughts, emotions, feelings that are happening to them. They don't do these on purpose. They have confidence levels that go up and down depending on various things that are happening to them in football and outside of football. So he's going out there. He's playing against, Carvalho and Terry at that time at Chelsea, Ferdinand and Vidic. And he's getting owned because he feels 5'2". So we created, it's one of the early examples of my technique called game face. His game face was aggressive monster, right? Because what I tend to do is I help players, this idea of a game face is stripping things back to action-based words and a model player or a metaphor. So Santi Gimenez at AC Milan, his is positive, upbeat Benzema. Because he loves Benzema, studies him. Positive and upbeat because he wants to stay positive, upbeat. I work with one of the best defenders in the Premier League, one of the best in the world, right? Dominant, relentless, dominant, relentless, dominant, relentless. That's his number one objective, dominant and relentless. For Carlton, it was aggressive monster. Aggressive was the word, and be a monster, because it evokes, 70% of our language is metaphorical, and we use metaphors to evoke different pictures, different feelings. So go out there, be an aggressive monster. Care not about how you play. You're not trying to go out there and score. Players they create anxiety by got to win, got to score, got to keep a clean sheet, got to play well, got to stay in the team, All of these things evoke anxiety. My job is to come along and go, no. I like the fact you want those things, but you've got to put those things to the side because they're gonna take care of themselves. And then we start to create a mental framework. So for Carlton, his mental framework is not the only thing he had, but it started with being an aggressive monster. Every run, every movement, every action, aggressive monster. He practiced that in training every day, every activity and every session, aggressive monster. Keep balls, rondos, small-sided games, aggressive monster. Be it, do it, act it. Be it, do it, act it. Head to your feet, out into your environment. Carvalho and Terry, what does that mean? Aggressive monster. Ferdinand and Vidic, what does that mean? Aggressive monster. I can't wait to go and be aggressive monster. Every run, every movement, every action, nothing and no one takes me away from aggressive monster. If I miss a chance to score, aggressive monster. If my first touch is poor, aggressive monster. If I give the ball away, aggressive monster. Nothing and no one takes me away from that. So you're starting to help them to get their activation levels, their action execution, energy forward. So we're coming back to it, helps them tighten up their attention. So that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to create these mini techniques that players go, I get that. I just got to go out there and be an aggressive monster. It makes sense to them. Yeah, I want to win. I want to perform well, but that's getting in my way. That's creating what we call ANTS. ANTS is an acronym for automatic negative thoughts. ANTS, automatic negative thoughts. The reason not all the time, but sometimes Arsenal won't do well on Saturdays because there's too many players with an infestation of ANTS, automatic negative thoughts. As though that infestation of ANTS distract them and disconnect them, lowers and raises their activations too high or too low, or it sets them energy back. That's the ANTS. And they need to get energy forward. They need to be focused and connected. They need to be alert and ready. And so what do they need to do? They need to get in their game face. They need to squash their ANTS. That's what Carlton did. And that was the title of the book, title of the chapter in Soccer Tough, my book, How Carlton Squashed His ANTS. How Carlton squashed his ANTS. He squashed his ants, got back into his game face. So you're trying to create a little simple as possible, fun as possible, practical as possible, and then just support that. Absolutely support it. And this is another thing coaches don't get right, is they don't always understand the amount that you have to reinforce this stuff. So my clients get a little message from me every single day on WhatsApp, by and large, of revolving around similar messages. Why? Because you've got to tell them the same things, because there's something about the socio-cultural narrative of elite level sport where they come back to an anxiety-inducive narrative around got to win, got to perform. It would be a disaster if I don't, because I won't be in the team. If I'm not in the team, I'm not being the footballer I want to be. I'm not being the footballer I want to be. And that has a knock-on effect to their identity, has a knock-on effect to their other emotions experienced. You've got to get them away from that every single damn day into their high performance mindset, which are a selection of these skills and tools.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just trying to absorb that. It's very deep, but it makes sense. You make it sound very complex, which I appreciate it is, but you also make it sound very simple with the thing like the game face. That's your sort of methodology, and it is everyone, regular Joes like us. If you say game face, when you said it earlier, I know I sort of sniggered and chuckled. I thought, yeah, because game face is you get in the zone. That's your high performance, isn't it? That's it. That's your high performance.
That's your high performance mindset. And sorry to interject, Ben, because I really want to emphasize. No. I really want to emphasize this because you're quite right. I'm giving you the whole piece. I'm giving you not a whole piece, but a big proportion of the piece here. This is 30 years of being a high performance sport. It's 20 years of being. I've also failed to mention earlier. I've also got a podcast with 300 episodes with speaking to the world's leading professors and sports psychology, sports coaching, pedagogy, skill acquisition. I do deep dives, so I really overthink this stuff. But ultimately, honestly, guys, with somebody like go back to Carlton or somebody at Feyenoord, or I'm just saying, hey, game face, come on, show me game face. For a lot of clients, I'm just constantly saying, be aggressive monster, or be dominant upbeat lion, or be relentless and focused, show that to me. I might give them a few more things, but I'm not giving them the attention, activation, action, execution. I might for some of them. It just depends who it is. Context matters, individual differences matter. I can give some players some deeper stuff, but some players, it's just go out there being, for Carlton, go be an aggressive monster. Fabio Capello has called you up. You're playing Spain, which he did, 15 minutes. Go be an aggressive monster. That's all you need to do. You might give the ball away. You might miss a chance to score, but you stay aggressive monster. That's all the narrative that he needs, and that's all the goal that he needs. But I'm giving you the complex whole sort of piece here.
And that's without going into kind of like, I guess, the chemical kind of reactions that's going on in your brain when you're having those sort of thoughts and feelings. And I guess is that like where that reinforcement impacts on that?
Hugely. Yeah. Very, very well said. I mean, how deep do you want to go here? I mean, I would always say that the game face is essentially, it's a pictorial metaphor and a linguistic representation that nudges on your biology. Human beings, their behavior is your behavior, my behavior is informed biopsychosocially. So your behavior, my behavior is constantly informed by a keen interaction between your biology, your psychology, and your social self, right? Biopsychosocial. So you're talking, Will, about the biological piece here, is that when psychologically, take Carlton, is thinking to himself, he's telling himself, he's using his self-talk, saying, come on, aggressive monster, aggressive monster. Okay. And then he's doing that from a social perspective, as in he's imposing himself on Ricardo Carvalho and John Terry, or Vidic and Ferdinand back then, right? So the social piece is that he's imposing himself, aggressive monster, on them. That's psychosocial. The biological piece is what's happening internally, is he starting to dictate the hormones that he's releasing, which could well be, and obviously this could be how complex you want to go, but it's basically a mix of dopamine, adrenaline, your performance hormones. Absolutely. There's some good work on the biopsychosocial states. They're called challenge and threat states. So you're finding a challenge state, and it's a lot to do with the measurements around blood flow, heart rate, and then the hormones being released. So there's some good sort of scientific research there, but you're quite right. You're always playing on your biology. I want my players you've got to take control and you've got to take charge. You've got to take control. Like coaches will say, I want to control the game. I'll say, you want players who can take control of themselves in order to control the game. And when you as a human being, in any situation, so you might be talking about footballers, you might be talking about yourself in the workplace. If you've got a boss that you find difficult to deal with, you'll be walking into that person's room, your boss's room, and you'll probably be releasing cortisol, which is your stress hormone. That makes a difference to your ability to articulate yourself, remember what you want to say, all those kind of things. You want to go in there and dictate your biology. And you do that by being in your own game face in that room. You do that by managing your body language. You do that all through a lot of subtle physiological signatures. That's what I do when I work in the corporate environment, is get people to dictate their biology during pitches or during facilitations or presentations or things like that. It's exactly the same as the workplace. Manage your biology.
Yeah, no, it certainly is something that, I mean, I've done a little bit of research into, but nothing too much. And I think for me, so me and Ben, we are kind of on like a bit of a weight loss journey. So we've joined a football club called Man v Fat. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but you basically go there, you play football. It's quite in a similar nature to like Slimming World and those sorts of things where you weigh in and you're meant to lose weight and stuff. But I think for me, what I've been trying to understand is like the kind of like that the psychology behind that addictive, that addictive want of being full or wanting to eat, and the taste and all of that sort of thing, but also how you sort of balance that up. And I was kind of just sort of wondering whether you would have any sort of advice for Ben and I and any of the other listeners that we have out there on weight loss and what you think that we could do differently or think about differently.
Yeah, sure. Several things, really. Firstly is acceptance. I think it's really, really important if you're trying to accomplish an objective is, actually, let me start again. When you're trying to accomplish an objective, invert the hierarchy. So make your little habits and behaviors the number one objective rather than the weight loss. Okay. It's not, I want to lose weight, and so I'll do this, this, and this. It's, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And as a consequence, I will give myself a great chance to lose weight. So reverse the goal hierarchy. As human beings, we all have goal hierarchies every single second. It's how we work as human beings. Invert it. It's not to lose weight. It's first and foremost to engage in lots of little habits and behaviors. Okay. So that's the first thing I'd say. That might resonate with some people. It might not resonate with others. The second thing I'd say is acceptance is important. This is where I was going to go. Acceptance of thoughts, emotions, feelings happen to me. I am going to have thoughts and feelings, especially around wanting to eat, wanting to go and munch on a snack, whatever it might be, and forgiving yourself for that. Again, I do think that that's an important thing, because as human beings, there's 8 billion human beings on planet Earth, and we know how tense geopolitical matters are right now and divisive the world is right now, right? But one thing we do all have in common, and we don't have a lot in common, but one thing we all do have in common is that we all experience our thoughts, emotions, feelings. When you strip psychology back, it's just thoughts, emotions, feelings. These happen to us, and I am going to experience thoughts and feelings emotions and feelings, but thoughts, emotions, and feelings around the things I don't necessarily want, because I'm used to having those. Those help me to feel great. That's the feeling. The feeling great is the dopamine, hitting you. It's the expectancy of having this and how great it's going to feel. And that is very, very, very powerful. It's very powerful. Now, what I would say in that is you experience thoughts, emotions, feelings. You have a choice point here. I've got a colleague, very good guy, Dr. John Rhodes, who's written a book called Choice Point. So I do want to give him credit here. And that choice point is basically, within, I think he says it's something like 5 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds, but the quicker, the better. You can catch yourself in terms of the thoughts, emotions, feelings that you're having. You need to respond to that. And that response can be your self-talk, that response can be a behavioral thing. You need to do something different that turns down the volume of thoughts, emotions, feelings. So if the thought in your mind goes, I fancy that Mars bar, okay, you need to catch that as quickly as possible by diverting your attention onto something else. That could be a different behavior. It could be reaching for a carrot rather than the Mars bar. Okay, it might be from an environment perspective that you don't have any Mars bars in the house, that old chestnut. It could be that you use your self-talk to remind yourself in that moment within a few seconds why you're doing what you're doing and what your end goal looks like. So it might be that you want to lose 2 stone, and when you lose 2 stone, you're going to go down from 15 stone to 13 stone, and this is what you're going to look like, and you're doing it for these reasons. And if you flood your mind by paying attention to those reasons, you're turning down the volume of the thoughts and feelings around the Mars bar and up the volume of why you're doing what you're doing. And so that gives you a better chance to not engage in the behaviors of having the Mars bar. So I think important here is invert the hierarchy, accept that you're going to have thoughts, emotions, feelings, and that it's tough to deal with them, but try to engage in a choice point as quickly as you can. That choice point is straight away. Use your self-talk, use behavioral stuff to go off in a different direction and immerse yourself in the next couple of minutes in that different direction to really turn down the volume of the want to have the Mars bar.
Yeah, makes sense. That's good
But
advice. Thank you.
It's no secret formula, and that's the thing. If there was a secret formula there, this is really important to know. If there was a secret formula, then that person is going to be a multi-billionaire, right? Because there's no psychological Ozempic, is it? That loss rate drug, which we don't know whether it's healthy or not, so don't go out and get Ozempic, but it's like there's no psychological secret. Psychology does come down to tools and techniques around a lot to do with attention, where you're directing your attention more than anything else.
And have you kind of noticed, I'm going to assume you have, but it would be interesting to hear what you say in terms of like with people coming through, so sportsmen coming through with bad habits, but also kind of having a bit more of an understanding on psychology and having a little bit more of an understanding, a different perspective of, I think, we've heard Gareth Southgate saying making those cultural changes and talking to people in a different way, whereas you had it in the old school kind of Brian Clough, where you're going to be sort of like almost shamed to perform, whereas now you are encouraged to perform. And is that, in your opinion, is that kind of the right way, and there's more work to be done in that?
I love every school. I like new school. I like old school. I think the only no-no in coaching is bullying or engaging in any kind of ism, racism, sexism, elitism, whatever ism you want to talk about. Those are off the table. Everything else is on the table. I think that there are some wonderful coaches who would be considered old school who engaged in incredible feats of psychology. There's no question about that. And I think that needs to be celebrated. One of the most joyous things I had was when I was with England Rugby, and we always had good people come along and watch. And one day Ray Wilkins, the late Ray Wilkins, and his brother came, and I very nervously sidled up and wanted to introduce myself. And I just had the most wonderful conversation. And, it's not as if he's going into the kind of depths that I'm talking about, but the things he spoke about, he said so much of this, what Eddie Jones has set up, it reminds me of being in Italy, and, and he regaled a few stories, and he talked about his approach with players. And, so many players of yesteryear and coaches of yesteryear who I speak to, are really, really, some of them are really, really good at this kind of stuff. So I don't deny that. I love old school, but I also love it when those who might be considered old school are willing to sit down and be open-minded themselves. And listen to people like myself, and people who are far better than me at this stuff. So I think all schools are really, really important. I really do. I think that's critical.
No, thank you. I think Sean Dyche recently spoke in an interview that I heard recently, and he sort of spoke about he's a bit more old school, but he can listen and adapt to the player and the individual that he's got in front of him. I'm just conscious of time and sort of keeping you a bit longer than we need to. But can you sort of tell us a little bit more about him and what he's like as a person, and whether you sort of noticed sort of some of the sort of change, the similarities between Feyenoord and Liverpool?
Arne is a wonderful coach. He's a lovely human being. I felt welcomed at Feyenoord, but at the same time, I think what Arne is, where Arne's strong, and I've said this on numerous good podcasts, and is that he hits that sweet spot between being open-minded and closed-minded. He's got a strong BS detector. Like he's not just going to accept everything that you say. I've worked with some coaches who just were kind of say, "That's great, I love that," and blah blah blah, and they kind of go away and do it. They kind of don't. It was always like he would listen attentively and make a decision whether he felt it was right for his context, him as a coach, his coaching staff, the team. Now, I might disagree. I might think that what I had to say, for example, in my experience with him was wonderful and marvellous, and he absolutely should use it. And he was crazy not to. And I'm not going to suggest that didn't happen, but he's the head coach, right? He has got so many voices. And so I thought he was really good at that. He's clearly a wonderful tactician. I mean, this is why I don't know that side of it. I'm not informed on that side at all, but, from listening to him, he sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and reading various stuff from people who write deeply about this, then it sounds like he's quite tactically astute. He's a hard worker, but they're all hard workers. And in fact, I get a bit fed up with that. I mean, some of them work too hard. And actually, to be honest with you, some of them supposedly work. Everyone goes, "Oh, he works hard," or "She works hard," and it's just like they're sitting at their laptop doing bugger all, doing nothing, and it doesn't actually help them. That genuinely happens at him, in my humble opinion. And but he works hard, yeah, but so do we all. But I just think it's his ability to get that sweet spot between open-minded. He speaks really well. Intelligence, speaks well to the players. That's not a small thing. Good English, not a small thing, especially when you come to the Premier League. Yes, it's a global game. That's not me being narrow-minded. That's me saying the Premier League is still in England. You've got a lot of staff behind the scenes who are English, British, or you've got to articulate yourself well. And he can articulate himself well in several languages. So just a lot of things thrown into the mix there that are impressive. Puts on good sessions. I've worked with Eddie Howe for 3 years at Bournemouth. Really, really good at putting on sessions. So yeah, it's just as always. I think with these things, he's got more of the jigsaw puzzle filled in, the coaching jigsaw puzzle, and I think that will continue to, he'll continue to put those missing pieces in as time goes on. Does that mean he'll definitely be successful? Who knows? After it looks like he's going to win the Premier League, but will he go on and do more? Who knows? It's a very complicated and complex landscape out there, and when things start to go wrong, one can easily slide. So nice. And what he's done at Liverpool, I mean, fair play. I mean, I'm not involved, but brilliant, just unreal. You guys must be devoed.
Very much so.
Certainly are.
Very much so.
It's just like the year Manchester City do hopeless. It's like, yes, we're going to be there, and it's I mean, at least you're second, but I think Arteta's done a great job. It's hard, man. It's hard. It's these are complex environments. Yeah.
Very much so. I think it's probably. I mean, I don't really want this to end. To be honest, I could ask you another 100 questions at this point because this is genuinely fascinating. But it's probably a good point to actually end. On behalf of everyone, I think a massive, massive thank you, Dan, for coming on. It's been honestly so insightful, and I'm sure everyone's going to love it. There is all the links in the description will be there for you to order all of Dan's books. So make sure you buy them all. And yeah, just a huge thank you from us.
Well, Ben, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for letting me be very loose-lipped. I'm sure I'm going to watch this back and go, oh, I can't believe I said that. It's just, I've just called everybody in the Premier League dumb. I don't think anybody in the Premier League is dumb. Can I just assert that?
We'll use that as the snippet for the advert. For
Yeah.
this, okay?
I see. This is right. Yeah, that's the way to get viewers, isn't it? To be sensationalist. I don't think that for completion here. I do think, however, there are gaps that can be exploited. I will think that to my dying day. So yeah, we'll see how that evolves.
Thank you.
Understand. Lovely. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening.